Yesterday, President Trump addressed last week's stock market turmoil caused by confusion around a tariff agenda.
Japan's shocking economic retaliation, a potential threat to the U.S. economy. Japan has recently taken a bold step that could send shockwaves through the global financial system and put immense pressure on the U.S. economy. In a move that many are calling unprecedented, Japan has started selling off substantial amounts of U.S. Treasury bonds. This action has raised concerns not only within the financial markets but also in Washington, D.C. Is this a direct challenge to U.S. policies, and what could the broader consequences be? For decades, Japan has been one of the largest holders of U.S. Treasury bonds, a relationship that has helped finance U.S. debt and stabilize the U.S. dollar. However, Japan has significantly reduced its holdings of these bonds in recent months. According to the latest financial data, Japan has offloaded tens of billions of dollars worth of U.S. debt, a move that has sent ripples through global markets. Why is Japan doing this? The reasoning behind Japan's decision seems to be tied to increasing trade tensions between the U.S. and Japan. One major issue is the U.S. government's tariffs on Japanese electric vehicles, EVs. The U.S. has imposed high tariffs on imported EVs, including those from prominent Japanese automakers like Toyota, Honda, and Nissan. Japan has expressed its dissatisfaction with these tariffs, which have effectively hindered its competitive edge in the growing electric vehicle market. As a response, Japan appears to be leveraging its financial influence by reducing its holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds. The bigger picture: reducing dependence on the U.S. dollar beyond the trade dispute. There is also the issue of Japan's broader economic strategy. Japan is following a global trend of reducing dependence on the U.S. dollar. Countries like China and Russia have already started diversifying away from the dollar, and Japan might be seeking to do the same. The global financial system is shifting, and Japan could be redirecting its investments into Asian markets, strengthening ties with countries like China and South Korea. If this trend gains momentum, it could signal a major shift in the global financial order, weakening the dominance of the U.S. dollar. This move comes at a time when the U.S. is actively working to boost its domestic EV industry to compete with China and Europe. With American companies like Tesla and Ford receiving substantial government support, the U.S. is aiming to protect and grow its own EV market. Japan, which has long been a leader in hybrid and electric vehicle technology, feels that its innovation is being unfairly sidelined by U.S. tariffs. The situation has reached a tipping point where Japan appears to be using its economic clout to make a statement. If the U.S. continues to impose protectionist tariffs, Japan will reduce its financial support for the U.S. economy. What happens if Japan continues selling U.S. bonds? The implications of Japan's move are far-reaching. If Japan continues to sell off U.S. bonds, the value of the U.S. dollar could decline. This could lead to higher import costs, driving up inflation in the U.S., as well as increasing borrowing costs for the U.S. government. Additionally, global financial markets could experience significant instability, potentially sparking a domino effect that impacts the world economy. The U.S. faces two choices in how to respond. One option is to compromise with Japan by reducing tariffs on imported EVs, which would help maintain financial stability. The other option is to continue its confrontational stance, risking further financial and trade tensions. Both paths carry significant risks, and the U.S. must decide how to navigate this complex situation. Japan's message to Washington. Will the U.S. respond? At the heart of this issue is the question of how much pressure Washington can withstand. Can the U.S. afford to ignore Japan's financial warning? Or will it be forced to back down and adjust its policies to preserve economic stability? This conflict may be just the beginning of a larger geopolitical and economic shift that could reshape the relationship between the two countries. Canada's strategic shift, moving away from U.S. dependence while tensions rise between the U.S. and Japan. Canada is also facing a crucial moment in its own economic and defense strategy. The 25% tariffs the U.S. imposed on Canadian steel and the 10% tariffs on aluminum in 2018 caused significant damage to Canada's economy, costing it about $2. $5 billion annually. Instead of accepting these punitive measures, Canada decided to retaliate by imposing tariffs on U.S. goods, including whiskey and steel products. However, as trade relations with the U.S. continue to strain, Canada recognizes the need to seek new international partners. One of the most significant steps Canada has taken in recent years is its defense deal with Australia. At the end of 2023, Canada signed a contract worth up to $6 billion Canadian dollars to purchase advanced radar systems known as the JRO radar, which will enhance Canada's surveillance capabilities in the Arctic. Why Australia? This deal marks a clear shift in Canada's defense strategy, moving away from its traditional reliance on U.S. military support. The JRO radar system, capable of detecting airborne targets at distances of up to 3,000 kilometers, will allow Canada to better monitor vast and remote regions without relying on U.S. systems. With the Arctic becoming increasingly important due to climate change and rising military activity from Russia, Canada's need for independent defense capabilities has never been greater. This deal also signals a broader shift in Canada's foreign policy. In recent years, Canada has signed multiple defense and trade agreements with countries in the European Union and Southeast Asia, totaling $7 billion in value. These agreements reflect Canada's strategy to diversify its international partnerships and reduce its dependence on the U.S. #The Arctic. A new strategic front, the Arctic region is becoming a focal point of geopolitical importance, not just for Canada, but for the world. The region's rich natural resources, combined with the increasing risk of military conflict, particularly with Russia, make it a critical area for surveillance and defense. Canada is focusing on enhancing its capabilities to secure its national sovereignty in the Arctic, which is likely to become an even more contested space as new shipping routes open up and access to untapped resources grows. Canada's strategic shift. A future of independence. By strengthening its defense partnerships with countries like Australia and diversifying its trade relations, Canada is signaling a strategic pivot away from U.S. reliance. The defense contract with Australia is not just about technology. It's a statement that Canada is willing to take greater control over its national security and economic future. This move could significantly reshape Canada's foreign policy and defense strategy for years to come, ensuring its position as a more independent player on the global stage. As global pressures mount and new challenges emerge, Canada's future in the Arctic and its broader role in international security will be crucial in determining its place in the world's shifting geopolitical landscape.
Yeah, the stock market has lost $5 trillion in 3 weeks. Yes, Trump, he's the Ozempic of the economy. Wow. 5 trillion. Today, Greenland offered to buy us.
In just 3 weeks, the U.S. stock market has lost a staggering $5 trillion. Prices are skyrocketing, wages remain stagnant, and the economy feels like a wild roller coaster ride. Yet, some continue to claim that this was the greatest economic era in history. Tonight, Bill Maher breaks it all down: the promises, the policies, and the reality. What really happened under Trump's leadership? Who actually benefited from his economic strategies? Bill Maher doesn't hold back, calling Trump a master of creating illusions, treating the U.S. economy just like his businesses. And let's be real, that's not exactly a glowing comparison. Trump Airlines crashed, Trump steaks were a joke, Trump University was shut down for fraud, and his casinos went bankrupt 6 times. A casino losing money? That's like failing a breathalyzer at an oxygen bar. Yet, Trump's economic approach was no different. National debt soared, adding $7.8 trillion in just 4 years. Market volatility spiked. Workers saw no real wage growth. But despite all this, Trump continued to boast about having the greatest economy ever, even as everyday Americans struggled to make ends meet.
What he's trying to tell us by continuing to do this dance. And now, making YMCA his answer.
Trump promised that his 2017 tax cuts would benefit the middle class, but the reality turned out to be quite different. In fact, the tax cuts largely favored the wealthiest Americans. A staggering 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%. Meanwhile, corporate tax rates were slashed from 35% to 21%. But instead of using those savings for higher wages, many companies opted for stock buybacks. As a result, billionaires like Jeff Bezos became even wealthier, while corporate executives saw their incomes soar. The average American, however, found themselves stuck in the same financial situation, only with rising living costs. And here's the kicker. By 2027, middle-class Americans will actually end up paying more in taxes. That's right. Despite the promises, the tax cuts will hit everyday people harder in the long run.
And Americans are like, we need eggs. What else are we going to throw at the Teslas? But you know what? $5 trillion in 3 weeks, and we have only ourselves to blame. Trump said this would happen if we re-elected Biden. Oh, wait, that didn't. No, this is happening because Trump wants to bring back manufacturing, and to get the ball rolling, he is manufacturing a recession.
Trump promised that his trade war would protect American jobs, but the reality was far different. It turned out to be a self-inflicted economic blow. Manufacturing jobs took a hit. Farmers lost billions as exports to China plummeted, and businesses faced higher costs, which led them to raise prices. So who really paid the price? Maher summed it up perfectly. Trump's trade war was like setting your own house on fire and calling it a heating strategy.
Trump says, I like reading as little as possible. I don't need, 200-page reports on something that can be handled on a page. He's actually proud that he makes decisions without learning anything, which makes him the perfect president for a nation perpetually looking at its.
Trump claimed he would create the strongest economy in history, but let's look at the actual numbers. GDP growth was only 3%, trailing Obama's 9%. The stock market lost over $5 trillion in just 3 weeks, and the national debt surged from $9 trillion to $7 trillion. Yet Trump kept repeating, it was perfect, it was amazing, it was the best. Maher put it best. If your economy only benefits billionaires and hedge fund managers, maybe it's not the best after all. ***, the Trump administration defies court orders. A legal showdown ***. Now, let's shift to a more shocking chapter, when an entire administration defies a federal court order. In a dramatic legal battle, the Trump administration is accused of violating a court ruling, raising critical questions about presidential power and the independence of the U.S. judicial system. On March 5th, a federal court ruled that the Trump administration had no legal grounds to use emergency powers to enforce deportation orders. The court issued a mandate to halt deportation flights immediately. But what happened next? Just hours after the ruling, at least 3 planes took off. According to an Axios report, 2 planes landed in El Salvador, and a third was already mid-flight when the court order was issued. This blatant defiance of a federal court order is unprecedented and raises a fundamental issue. Can an entire government simply override judicial authority without facing consequences? Trump's response? He didn't comply. Instead, he escalated tensions by publicly attacking the federal judge, calling for his impeachment. But can this even happen under the U.S. Constitution? A judge can only be impeached for misconduct or abuse of power. There's no precedent for removing a judge simply because their ruling was unfavorable to the president. This raises a chilling question. Could this set a dangerous precedent that threatens the balance of power in American democracy? ***, Supreme Court Chief Justice issues historic warning *** amid mounting pressure from the White House. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts broke his silence. In a rare and forceful statement, he declared, impeachment cannot be used as a weapon against judicial rulings that the administration disagrees with. This is a historic intervention. In over 200 years, the Supreme Court has rarely intervened so directly in a political dispute. It's not just a reminder, it's a clear warning to the Trump administration. If Trump succeeds in this, what happens next? Will the judiciary remain independent, or will it become a political tool used to further the president's agenda? Asterisk implications for Trump's campaign and American democracy asterisk. This isn't just a legal battle. It's one that could have a significant impact on Trump's re-election campaign. A majority of Americans, 56%, believe the judicial system should remain independent. Even among Republican lawmakers, there are signs of growing division over Trump's actions. Meanwhile, international media are warning that this ongoing conflict could undermine American democracy for generations to come. The next developments will determine the future of American politics. Will the Supreme Court step in again? Can Trump rewrite the rules of the game? The legal war has only just begun, and what happens next could change everything. Stay tuned.